I think that attitude is a dangerous word when it comes to being a manager because there's a lot of shoulds implied with the word attitude. Like you should have a good attitude, you should have a positive attitude. And I don't think that's the most important. I think the most important thing to being a great manager is to be sincere and to sincerely care about the people that you're working with and to be sincerely interested in them and sincerely interested in helping them grow both professionally and as human beings. One of the great things that Sheryl Sandberg did for us at Google was to bring in this coach named Fred Kaufman. And it was as a result of coaching sessions with him that I realized how much I cared about writing and managed to find the time to write a novel while I was working at Google. And that helped me as a person, probably more than as a manager, but it also made me a better, happier manager. So I think that being sincere and caring about the people you're working with, both as professionals, but also just as human beings. I think one of the hardest things about giving great feedback is controlling your own emotions. It's really hard not to react to somebody else, especially if they're getting angry or if they start to cry or if they just start to shut down. Very, very difficult to just continue to be clear in those situations. A few things have helped me. There was one time at Juice, the startup that I did, when I realized the most important thing I could do for that company was not hire great engineers, not set a great strategy, not raise money, but get enough sleep and go running every morning. Because maintaining my own sort of emotional equilibrium was incredibly important to helping the people around me be effective and to help myself be clear and not to react in the moment to the stress. I have been very lucky. I think the companies where I've worked, people have generally taken pretty good care of themselves, and there's an emphasis at the companies where I've worked on taking care of yourself. I mean, there are always times when people are not getting enough sleep or are not exercising, but I've been it's one of the things I love about Silicon Valley is there does seem to be a focus on hard work, but people generally take pretty good care of themselves. When there have been times when I've been working with somebody, particularly people really early in their careers, right out of college. And I have found that I'm having to remind them to get some sleep, that I'd rather have you not do, several things, and I'll go so far as to take things off of people's to-do lists. But in general, I think people take care of themselves. I try not to fall into the role of mother figure as manager. Often when you get feedback from people, either in a formal 360 process or just sort of off the cuff, it'll be very true, and it's going to sting a little bit. And in fact, if you're not getting feedback that stings, you're probably not getting enough feedback. One of the things that I have found very helpful to sort of cope with the sting is to focus on the learning. What really motivates me in life is to continue to improve, to get better. And so when I see, even though it stings, the truth in what somebody is saying, that is very helpful. So for example, one time when my boss told me that I sounded stupid in a presentation because I said too much, it stung, but I also, I could immediately see that was true and that there was a solution to that, and it was useful to identify. So trying to focus on sort of improvement and growth instead of what hurts or doesn't hurt is one of the ways that has helped me to sort of take it. Another time, there was somebody who worked for me who said, Kim, you're too fast to hit the bozo bit. and meaning that I would make up my mind about somebody and then I wouldn't keep taking new input. And one of the things I pride myself on is that I think I'm a good judge of character and a good judge of people, and so that was a hard thing for me to hear. But I realized as I thought about it that there was a lot of truth to it. So I've tried to remember that. I think that it's important to show that you're human and you're vulnerable, but it's also important to show that you're confident. If you are going to turn into a puddle every time somebody gives you feedback, you won't get feedback anymore. It's important if you can not cry when you get feedback. It's important not to cry, because if you cry the next time, people are not going to give you feedback. Which is not to say you should never cry. We all do sometimes. It's important not to yell. It's important not to lose your temper. It's important to take that feedback and to grow from it. At the same time, I think that you do your best work, that everyone does their best work when they bring their full selves to work. And we're all vulnerable. So I don't think you want to exaggerate your vulnerabilities, but you've got to be human. Because telling people what to do never works. I think the way to think about direction and getting everybody on the same page is, there's another simple model I like to use. It's a circle. The first thing you have to do is listen, right? Next, you have to decide. And deciding, again, is not something that you do as a manager. You need to make sure that there is a process that everybody participates in. And I describe the process as ideas get clarified and then debated and then iterated. Clarify, debate, clarify, debate. And that can feel endless. And especially at a startup where you sort of think you're moving fast and you think you should just have the answer. You still have to make your ideas very clear and open yourself up to debate. And especially when you're a CEO, you sort of feel like you have this intuition about what should happen, and it's tempting to just tell people to do it. It just won't work. If you want them to really understand the idea, you've got to make sure that you go through this clarify, debate, and eventually a decision comes out. Part of your job as a manager, I think, is to make sure that instead of making decisions, for example, in your staff meeting, what you want to do is you want to identify what are the 3 most important decisions that need to get made this week. And what are the 2 or 3 ideas that need to get debated this week? And who needs to do it? And the more you take yourself out of that, the better. James March has written a great book about a primer on decision making. And one of his ideas is that people's egos get invested in being part of a decision making process. And if they're not involved in the decision, it's almost like a loss of personhood. It's impossible to exaggerate how much people care about being part of the decision. I remember when I was doing my startup, I had a staff meeting, and eventually, at first it was really, everybody at the company was in the meeting. And then we get to this point that the company is too big and some people are excluded, like the agony around like it was very hard to manage. So make sure that at that meeting, what you're doing is you're identifying the things that get debated, the things that get decided, and you're pushing those debates and those decisions into the work. The other thing that James March says about decision making is that most of it happens in a garbage can. Because people's egos get so invested in making decisions, it's generally the people who are highest in the hierarchy who make the decisions as opposed to the people who actually know the facts, right? Don't let that happen to you. make sure that you're pushing decisions into the facts. You need to provide context for people that people deep in the facts may not have. But you need to push them to make the decisions. Your job is to make sure that the debates are happening and that they're stopping at a certain point and decisions get made, right? And once the decisions are made, they've got to get communicated. That's often, as a manager, your job. Although you might let the people who made the decisions communicate the decision itself, the what, but you are responsible for making sure that everybody understands the why, how this decision is connected to the other 5 decisions that got made, and how one team's work is connected to another team's work, and how the whole fits together, and why you're doing it in the first place, like the mission behind what you're doing. You need to constantly come back to that as the manager, either connecting it up to a broader company mission, or if you're the CEO and founder of your company, to why you care about this in the first place and why everybody else cares in the first place. And then, having done that, and that took a ton of energy, right? You had to listen. It was sort of frustrating to have to listen. You had to go through this endless clarified debate cycle. Then you had to communicate all these grand ideas. Stop and start over and start listening again, right? So that's how you get a team of people moving in the same direction, I think. So I'll give you a positive example and a negative example of direction setting. I once worked with a manager who was a great guy, but he did a terrible job providing direction for his team. Instead of listening to what everybody wanted to do, putting them through the clarified debate cycle, and then communicating it, he started with communicate. He decided all by himself, and then he communicated. And the meeting where he did this was one of the most painful meetings I've ever seen in my life. He started out saying, here's what we're going to do this quarter. And everybody was like, that's not what I'm going to do this quarter. You could practically see the thought, like, doesn't he know what I really do? There was the thought bubbles. And then he thought but he misinterpreted the thought bubbles. He thought that his job was to be Mr. Inspiring. And so he started trying to put on this sort of JFK act. And people were definitely not buying that. And then he thought the problem was that he hadn't, flattered the team enough or said enough nice things. So he started in this way that was sort of obviously insincere, flattering the team, and he failed. He had to leave as a manager. So that's how not to set direction. One of the people I worked with who was best at it was a guy named Scott Scheffer at Google, who worked for me, and for a long time I did kind of what the failed manager did. I sort of came up with OKRs. I allowed a lot of debate, but Scott came to me one day and he said, let's let the team tell us what they're going to do this quarter. We're not going to tell them what they're, and I said, really? And he said, trust me. And I had worked with him for a long time, and so I trusted him. And sure enough, he listened. We listened to a bunch of ideas, and everybody listened to each other. There were a series of big debates on the team, which I was not allowed to participate in. I got to hear the results of it. And then the team communicated to us what they thought the objective and key results ought to be for the quarter. And, we suggested some edits, but basically that was what the team did. More productive quarter that quarter than any other of the previous quarters. So that worked really, really well. Another example of direction setting going badly and then working well. For a long time, I thought the purpose of my staff meetings, and this was at Juice Software, I thought the purpose of my staff meetings was for us to make decisions. And then I realized that We didn't have the right people in the room. We didn't have enough facts in the room. And we didn't have enough time. The staff meeting was going to wind up taking half a day or something. And also there were a bunch of people at the company unhappy that they weren't in the staff meeting. So instead of making any decisions at all in the staff meeting, what we did was we identified, here are the debates that need to happen this week. Here are the decisions that need to happen this week. And here's who is going to make them. The net result of that was that better decisions got made. People were happier, morale improved, and I had more hours in my day. So it was a good thing. Part of direction setting is often coming up with objective and key results. That's what Google called them and a bunch of other companies in Silicon Valley. KPIs, key performance indicators, is another term for it. There's probably 1,000 others. So one of the mistakes I made early on at Google was that I thought it was my job to set the OKRs for the team. Wrong. It happened much better when the team set the OKRs, not me. And so my job was to listen to what people wanted to do, make sure that people were clarifying their ideas for each other, not selling them, but clarifying them, and then debating them, right? And then making sure that decisions were reached that I agreed with, and sort of providing some of the constraints. And then the team communicated the OKRs, and I sort of provided some context. So that's part of direction setting. Usually the OKR setting usually happens once a quarter. That's a great example of how you provide direction in a more quarterly way.